The most frequently asked question I get when it comes to Warzone always has to do with my mouse sensitivity. So in this video, I'm going to break down every single setting that has to do with sensitivity. And I'm going to hope by the end of this video, you're going to have a much better understanding of what all these little different things mean. We're also going to discuss what the best sensitivity is to play on Warzone, especially if you're new to the game. Now, if you came here looking for something in particular, everything in the video will be timestamped below. If I end up missing anything you were looking for, please feel free to ask me in the comments, or you can stop by my Twitch at twitch.tv/tcaptainx, and we can have a conversation there about your aim. Now, I do want to start with a little bit of a disclaimer. By simply copying my settings or anyone else's settings and sensitivity does not mean your aim is automatically going to get better. In fact, it might be worse initially. Aim is very muscle memory based, so if you've been playing on a certain sensitivity or setting for a while and then you change it, you're probably going to be worse initially. My rule of thumb in terms of changing sensitivity is always stick to it for at least a week or two and then make adjustments. My most popular video on my YouTube channel was a video similar to this where I discussed mouse sensitivity and settings. And at that time, my sense was a good bit higher than what it is now. And I wanted to lower it, but what I did was about once per month, I decreased it by about 10% until I got to a point that I was happy with. So let's get started. Let's go into our options and then under keyboard and mouse. So let's start with my sensitivity. My sensitivity is 3.2 and I play on a DPI of 800. Now, if you're new to mouse and keyboard, you might not understand what DPI is. DPI is essentially the sensitivity of your mouse itself, and then that is multiplied by your game sensitivity. So if we take our DPI times our game sensitivity, that is going to equal your eDPI, which is essentially what your actual sensitivity is going to be. So for example, if I cut my mouse sensitivity in the game in half, but I doubled my DPI, it would end up being the same eDPI and it would feel the same in game. In terms of what a good DPI is, I think 800 is a really good starting place unless you like to play very high sensitivity, or if you like your general mouse sensitivity of moving around on menu screens or just in your computer itself to be higher. The majority of like high level Call of Duty players play on either 400, 800 or 1600 DPI, but you can really play on whatever you want at the end of the day. Just, I would not go any below 400 because it can cause your mouse to be choppy. Now, just as another disclaimer to start, this is a very, very low sensitivity, but we're going to discuss more on low versus high sensitivity at the end of the video. So when you open up the advanced tab for mouse sensitivity, there's some other multipliers that you can change here. The only one I have adjusted is the air vehicle sensitivity multiplier, and that is because on mouse and keyboard, it's really awkward turning helicopters in game, and it makes it a lot easier and smoother to do so if you just crank it to the max. Now, one thing you can consider changing is the ground vehicle sensitivity. This allows you to look around quicker. However, if there is anything that has like a turret involved, such as if you're playing multiplayer with like a tank, or when like the Armored Royale is in session, that will also mess with that sensitivity. So I normally just keep it at 1. I highly discourage adjusting your vertical sensitivity multiplier because you really want to keep it 1-to-1 and kind of keep that muscle memory the same. Moving on, the aim down sight mouse sensitivity, relative versus legacy. This is probably the most confusing thing in this entire video, and I had to do a little bit of research so that I fully understood it to give you guys a better explanation. Now, I've always played on relative, and essentially with relative, what it's going to do is it has to do with your monitor distance coefficient, which as we open this up, this is a whole nother setting. Essentially what legacy is going to try to do is when you're zoomed in, it's going to try to keep your sensitivity feeling the same based on the distance of your monitor. When I go to legacy, it's hard to tell for you guys. I know I have my hand cam here, but legacy feels a lot faster. And what legacy is doing is it's keeping your sensitivity the same in terms of the actual distance. So like if we go from this tree to this corner, it's trying to keep that sense the same. But on relative, it's going to keep it, because there's a slight zoom effect, it's going to adjust for that zoom effect and then try to keep it the same. I feel like you tend to notice this more with snipers, like high zoom things, but it really is just a preference. Like when I switch this feels a lot lower sensitivity, and I prefer that personally because it's it's like moving the same distance in terms of the monitor. Like I said, it's a very confusing concept. Play around with it and see how you like it before kind of making any jumps. But I will say the vast majority of players do play on relative. So moving on to the ADS, the rest of the tab here under the advanced setting, we have our ADS multiplier. So you have low zoom and high zoom. The way the low versus high zoom works is essentially anything with a zoom greater than 3.25 is going to be high, and anything with a zoom less than 3.25 is going to be low. So for example, on my low is going to be my RAM here, because this has like a probably 1.1 zoom, maybe something like that. Whereas my car is going to be a high sensitivity because it's much more zoomed in. In general, I recommend keeping those two the same, again, for muscle memory purposes, but there are some people that like to have their high zoom higher because they feel like it's moving too slow because of how zoomed in it is. Now, transition timing. There are 3 settings when it comes to transition timing. I play on instant, and it's what I recommend, again, for muscle memory purposes. Essentially, all this is the moment you right click to zoom in, and this would go for controller as well, it's going to change your sensitivity to whatever your multiplier is. So for myself, I'm playing on a 0.75 multiplier, and as soon as I click it, it's going to adjust it. Gradual is like a progressive. It's like a bell curve type thing, where as you zoom in, it's going to change. So as soon as I right click, it's going to change. And then after zoom is going to be, it's not going to take effect until your gun is finally zoomed in. I think this would be the worst to use, because it's going to you might start shooting at an opponent right before your gun gets zoomed in, and then your sense is going to change. So I highly recommend doing instant, but gradual wouldn't be that bad either. Monitor distance coefficient. This is a little bit of another confusing setting to go over. This all has to do with the size and resolution of your monitor. I believe the default is 1.33, but that is incorrect for most standard 1080p monitors. So to find out what your monitor distance coefficient is, all you have to do is take the width resolution of your monitor divided by the height resolution of your monitor. If you're playing on a standard 1080p monitor, it's going to be 1920 divided by 1080, which equals 1.78. The 1.33, which is default, is for the old school 4:3 ratio monitors. Most monitors nowadays are 16:9. And then if you're playing on a 1440p, it should also be the same, as long as it's a standard size monitor. If you're playing on like an ultra wide or something like that, you would need to find out what your width resolution and divide it by your height resolution. So ultra wide monitors are usually going to have weird looking monitor distance coefficients. I forgot to explain this when I was originally recording this video, what monitor distance coefficient actually is. Essentially all it is it's what is syncing your horizontal and vertical sensitivity. So if you've been playing on 1.33 for a long time, and then you're now changing it to 1.78, your vertical sense will feel slightly off. However, I do recommend changing it. It will be worth it, again, because it will create a better muscle memory in terms of an actual 1-to-1 vertical to horizontal sensitivity. Moving on to invert mouse look, I really highly suggest not doing this. Now, if you're like an old school player and you've played like old shooter games, you might like this. Essentially, this just flips. So if we were to enable this, there is an airplanes only mode, but if we were to enable this, you push to go down and then you pull to go up. So there's some people that played on games like way back in the day that like that. But if you're like my age or younger, you're definitely going to want to keep that disabled. Mouse acceleration and mouse filtering. Highly recommend turning both of these to 0 along with mouse smoothing. Essentially what these do is, like for mouse acceleration, for example, if we were to crank this guy up here, what this does is when I'm moving slowly, my sense is the same, but when I start moving faster, it like multiplies your sense. So don't do that. I promise you, keep that off. And then mouse filtering and smoothing kind of do similar things. Again, just keep them off so that you have consistent aim. One other small thing I forgot to mention when I was recording this again is in your general Windows, search mouse settings. Click on that guy here. Go to additional mouse options. And then from here, go to pointer options. Make sure your enhanced pointer precision is turned off. This is another thing that can kind of cause like that whole mouse acceleration smoothing thing that you don't want in game. I think Warzone is a game that even if it's on doesn't matter, but there are other games out there that it will mess your aiming up and it will kind of like create some inaccuracies in terms of aiming. Now, the other thing that does highly affect your aim that I want to talk about is field of view, which is over in the general tab. I play on the max field of view of 120 with an affected ADS field of view. Now, I have a full YouTube video going very in depth on this subject if you want to learn more about field of view, but to give you the crash course, independent, what independent does is when you zoom, it zooms in a lot more versus when we go back to affected, it keeps that zoom out. There's less of a zoom effect. The difference between the two essentially is independent is going to allow you to have your targets appear larger. However, it will make your recoil feel worse because you're more zoomed in. You have to make up for more that the gun is moving per the size of your monitor, if that makes sense. Like I said, if this is confusing to you, go check out my other YouTube video. I'll have it linked in the description below. Okay, so now that we have all the settings out of the way, we're now going to start the part of the video where it's going to be more of a discussion on high versus low sensitivity. So I play very low sensitivity. So if you guys watch me move around, you'll see I have to move my entire arm. So for me to do a 360, it is a full kind of arm movement around. I am an arm aimer. That is more comfortable for me, and I personally am much more accurate when I aim with my arm versus aiming with my wrist. Now, I still use my wrist quite a bit for fine precision aiming. So for example, let's say somebody was going to be coming out of this door right here. If he's coming out, I'm going to track him with my wrist in a small movement like this. But if he was here and he was maybe like driving by in a car, I'd have to use my arm to track him in a quicker motion. And then same with like if I'm gonna fly through here and turn, this is all arm, okay? So what you have to determine is what are you comfortable with doing, and also do you have the desk space to do so? I am luckily, I have the ability, I have a huge desk that I have essentially unlimited arm movement. I can pretty much go as wide as I need to without hitting anything. A lot of people don't have that luxury, and you're not going to be able to play on a super low sensitivity. So let's try to kind of define what low versus high sensitivity is. I would kind of say, so I am definitely like in the low to even like ultra low sensitivity. Some other people like that are Huskers, who plays on a very similar sensitivity as myself. I would say low is anything about less than a 6 game sense with 800 DPI. So for all these I'll talk about, I'll be using it based off an 800 DPI. In terms of what a more average sensitivity is, which is what I would recommend for someone new to the game, I'd recommend between 6 and 10 with an 800 DPI. And then really anything above that is starting to get pretty high. There's people that play on absurdly high sensitivities and they're still very accurate. There's nothing wrong with playing high or playing low. Again, I want to be as unbiased as possible. Someone who's really good to go watch who plays on an absurdly high sensitivity is Corrupt TV. I'll link his Twitch in the description, but he plays on, let's see, I have it written down here in my notes. He plays on 2600 DPI, 12 game sensitivity, which is just absurd compared to me. So he is all wrist and very fine wrist and even finger movement in order for him to be accurate. Whereas myself, I'm much more arm. And he plays with a hand cam as well, like myself. So if you want to go watch that, I highly recommend checking him out. Another good person who's like a much more average sensitivity in terms of aiming is Strafe. He is very big on YouTube and Twitch. He has amazingly good aim. He plays 5.5 game sense with an 800 DPI, somewhere in that ballpark. And he is disgustingly smooth aim. Now, the other thing to talk about though is your aim down sight multiplier. So what a lot of people do like to do is they like to have a relatively normal sense in terms of game. So for example, I could turn up my mouse sense to like 6, I could double it or so. And then I could lower my ADS sense a lot, like 0.5, 0.4. And what that would do is in terms of general movement, I would be able to move around quicker with less movement. But then when I was aiming, you would have that low sensitivity, which would be very good for tracking and things like that. So what are the benefits of high versus low sensitivity? In general, low, you kind of have the ability to be a little bit more precise, in my opinion, because you have much more range of motion to aim. So if you're playing very high sensitivity, I just upped my sense to 20. So you're going to see this is all wrist. I mean, I can do a 360 and basically a wrist movement here. You have, if I'm aiming here, you have, it's a lot harder, in my opinion, to control recoil because it's such a small amount of movement to do so. Whereas if we go back to my normal low sensitivity, you're going to see I have a ton more room and just precision to control that recoil. Now, some people in terms of just body mechanics though are more comfortable in making these micro adjustments with their wrists versus if you are a low sense player like myself, it's a lot more using your arm and even your shoulder, especially when you're pulling back and down. And this is why if you're brand new to Warzone or playing anything, you know, shooter in terms of mouse and keyboard, I recommend of sitting somewhere in the middle and kind of just finding what you like. So I think I started playing Warzone on a 6 sensitivity. And this is still, I can very easily move. I don't need that much mouse space to do this. And it's still, I have good control. But for me personally, again, I like being even lower. That's just my preference though. Now there are a few cons to high sensitivity aiming. One, it can be actually shoulder problems. If you have a bad shoulder or if you don't have like a great chair and desk setup, it can be very awkward because you're using your arm much more. But same goes with high sensitivity aiming. If you have wrist issues, you're gonna a lot of the time stress your wrist a lot more. There's a lot of wrist injuries when it comes to like professional gamers and stuff like that. And me personally, my wrist has bothered me a little bit in the past, but lowering my sensitivity has pretty much eliminated that. The general rule of thumb is as you're adjusting your sensitivity and trying to define your sense, if you feel really shaky and inaccurate and just you're all over the place with your aim, then you might want to lower your sense a little bit or lower just your aim down sight speed sense slightly. Now, some other things though about low sense that can be bad is in terms of close quarters tracking. So if someone busted through this door and I would have to like flick around, me personally, it doesn't bother me. I've been playing low sense for a while where I can do this pretty quickly and in a pretty accurate manner. But this is very hard for people that are new to mouse and keyboard gaming when you're playing very low. So a high sense player could do this with much less movement and in a much faster motion. So in general, close quarters tracking tends to be a little bit easier, I think, on a higher sensitivity, but really long distance tracking, like if someone's gliding in from the gulag, I think on a low sense, it's super easy to track someone if you're playing low sense. A few other things to consider as well is, apart from having enough desk space to play low sensitivity, you also want to consider what kind of mouse do you have. So I have a wireless Glorious Model O. Love this mouse. I'm very happy with it. I had it for quite some time now. Before this, I had the same version but wired. And when I was playing around my 6 sensitivity, it was okay. However, when I wanted to go lower, I was catching the wire a lot on different things on my desk. So if you do play very low sensitivity, I highly recommend getting a wireless mouse. If you're playing average to high, it's usually not a big deal as long as you can get that wire in a certain area where it's not going to catch on things. And then another thing in terms of when you're kind of finding your sensitivity, if you're playing on PC, definitely recommend investing in an aim trainer like Kovacs. It's only $10 on Steam. There is also Aim Lab, which is free, I believe. I haven't tried it myself though. And being able to practice in something like that is great for getting that repetition and starting to build that muscle memory. I am going to be doing a whole Kovacs series in the future on my channel. I do have a current one that is specific to sniping though, which I'll also put in the description. But on that same note, I also recommend not devoting hours and hours to an aim trainer. You need to play the actual game so you can get used to movement and things like that and how recoil is, because aim trainers can't always replicate that. So one of the best things to do is you can load into a private match, put bots on, max their health out, just run around and kill bots for a little bit, or play something more or less stressful like Plunder or multiplayer ground war so that you get used to those longer engagements. And that can really help in finding your sensitivity. So in summary, when it comes to Warzone sensitivity, if you're new, I think starting between 6 and 10 sensitivity on 800 DPI with an ADS multiplier in the ballpark of anywhere from 0.7 up to 1. is good. Personally, 0.75 has worked really well for me. That is a very preference thing. Some people do play crazy low multipliers. I don't think it's a great idea because it's a huge difference in aim and it's going to be weird to develop that muscle memory. If you look at a bunch of the top Warzone players that play mouse and keyboard, the majority of them are playing on relatively low sensitivities. Huskers, who is the #1 earnings player on mouse and keyboard in all of Warzone, plays a very similar sensitivity that as I do. If you look at other people like Iron, who is, I think he used to be #1 in wins, he's #2 now. He plays pretty similar to myself. Symphony, Iceman, Isaac, those are all people, they all play low sensitivity, lower than average. And that is because it is, if you can get used to the arm speed, it tends to be more accurate. But again, there are people that are disgustingly good at this game that play mouse and keyboard on a high sensitivity, and they do great. It's just, do you have those fine motor skills to be accurate with such micro movements? Now, I am also going to be doing a video on practice routines for making, if you play low sensitivity, for making it not feel so slow, and that's called speed training. I'm not going to get into that in this video though. That'll be for the next one. Guys, I hope this video helped you. Again, if you have questions, let me know, or feel free to drop in on my Twitch and ask me over there. Please consider dropping a like and subscribing to the channel if this video helped you. I'm going to be doing an entire series on Kovacs and aiming in general. So if you're looking to improve your aim and mouse and keyboard player, I highly suggest you checking out the channel. Thank you guys, and have a great day.
You guys have any,
Dude.
There's another one there.
Enemy dropping into the AO.
Oh my god.